We live in an age that all too often hides behind irony to avoid reality. Dark carnivals and killer clowns have not surprisingly become archetypes. A few years ago, there were over 100 sightings of so-called malevolent clowns lurking and stalking in settings where they were clearly out of place, like along the roadside or at schools. Cinematically, the dark carnival is everywhere, most exquisitely in Ray Bradbury's Something Wicked This Way Comes, and most recently in the Baz Luhrmann Elvis biopic, where the trickster ex-carny Colonel Parker, portrayed by Tom Hanks, who plays a nice guy in real life, Harlequin, headed scepter in hand, stealthily approaches the future king of rock and roll from behind to groom him to fulfill his own dark destiny. The Dark Carnival is ubiquitous in settings for Joker and Riddler character vehicles in film and television. There is such a setting for a Batman the Animated Series episode entitled If You Were So Smart, Why Aren't You Rich?, which introduces the Riddler. This is a 1992 episode and features a semi-subliminal spelling out of the word sex. The scene where Batman and Robin first come across the Minotaur maze in an amusement park, the word sex can be seen in the background. The S and E are part of the name of a carnival attraction, while the X is hidden as part of the scaffolding that appears just behind it. Naming the amusement park Minotaur in that example is very significant, as it was within the maze of Greek mythology that children were ritually sacrificed. And that brings us to the heart of the Dark Carnival and Killer Clown as evil talismans in the very real spiritual war being waged upon humanity by those of the elder race we call angels and their disembodied demonic progeny. The purposes of this war are to turn us away from reconciliation with the Most High, attained through the sacrifice and resurrection of our Messiah, Yahshua HaMashiach, Jesus Christ, to corrupt us from the image of Yah, recreating us as post-humans in their twisted and perverse image. These foul aims of our enemy are aimed most pointedly at children, either with subtlety in their entertainment or more perniciously in terrorizing, abuse, and ritual murder. Carnivals and clowns make for easy entry into our inner worlds, as they are nominally all about fun and games. But in our pop culture, this took a malevolent turn in the late 80s with the film Killer Clowns from Outer Space and Stephen King's novel It. But I'm convinced this was merely playing on some really dark spirits that were already there, and I speak in part from my own experience. When I was a toddler in Mid-City New Orleans, living above Larry's Bar, decades before the aforementioned film and novel, I would often have very clear visions. There was no clear dividing line between dreams and so-called real life at that point. And I would have visions of evil clowns walking about our little apartment while my parents slept. I could deeply perceive two things about these uninvited intruders: that they were keenly aware of me, and that they were what I would later learn to term deranged or insane. And it was that break with the elegance of order that terrified me into complete speechlessness and immobility. There were definitely unclean spirits attached to that dwelling, or to my father, who was to have many more paranormal experiences over the next 2 decades. In that same apartment, in that same time frame of which I'm speaking, he was laying in bed with my mother when they both saw an arm come around the doorway. My father bolted up, but there was nobody there. During that same preschool age, my family attended a community carnival. My parents, wishing to augment my enjoyment, said to my older brother, "Mike, take Craig down to see the clown." As I looked down the bleacher seats in the direction Mom was pointing, I saw a typical hobo-esque clown and was immediately filled with abject terror. I started screaming bloody murder, "No, no, no," yanking my arm free of my bewildered brother's protective grasp. The clown excursion was canceled in favor of acrobatic dogs in tutus animating the second ring. The point being, maybe it isn't just because they're out of the ordinary. Maybe there's just something basically strange about clowns. Some mutated gene in their ancestral development, as well as their natural habitat, the circus and the carnival. I've said that before there was blackface, there was whiteface, and both are possessed of insidious spirits. Dan Mitchell endured vivid visitations for years from a white, thin, androgynous Harlequin figure, recounted in the book he authored along with Steph Young, Luminosity, the Story of the Harlequin. He believes the door was opened to this other world by childhood trauma, actually similar to one I experienced myself, by panic during forceful hair washing by a father that felt like I was drowning. This book is also a good resource on the development of the Harlequin and the clown in their relationship to magic and demons. The Harlequin, a carnival staple image, had its origins in the 16th century Commedia dell'arte in Rome. It was closely associated with pantomime, magic, deception, metamorphosis, and assorted demonic crafts and abilities. It may also have derived from the Zani character, a creepy, treacherous, village idiot trickster wearing an extremely long-nosed mask. This is the dark root of the circus clown image, based or inspired perhaps by demons, the disembodied spirits of the giants, resulting from the human fallen angel coupling noted in Genesis 6 and the book of 1st Enoch. So these beings, entirely inimical to the human race, may have laid the foundation for modern horror and science fiction by way of the carnival. In Something Wicked This Way Comes, Ray Bradbury splits himself into Will Holloway, born October 30th, a minute before midnight, and Jim Nightshade, born 2 minutes later, and thus on Halloween. The boys are the opposites. They live their lives waiting for the freedoms of adulthood, one willingly, one impatiently. Stephen King, in Danse Macabre, says that this is why the carnival wants them. Evil's greatest need is to compromise and corrupt that delicate passage from innocence to experience that all children must make. Cougar and Dark's Pandemonium Shadow Show brings misery and horror under the guise and allure of pleasure and wonder. The carousel returns you to a time of life that you think you want to be in and that you see in the Hall of Mirrors. But as the adage goes, be careful of what you wish. Ray Bradbury was early on a huge fan of director Todd Browning and Lon Chaney Sr., and he would himself make dark carnival images central to his work. The magnetic enchantment of grotesqueries, mysteries, darkness, and tricks. A place of illusion and deception, of con men and those they swindle out of their dollar, the rubes and the marks. The amusement park funhouse mirrors, which present us with horrifying yet entrancing versions of our own face. The modern circus ring was invented in the late 18th century by the same English inventor who would include the sideshow with animal and human freaks and other bizarre exhibits. In this vein, P.T. Barnum would create popular culture via his so-called dime museums in New York. Barnum, of course, also attached his name to what became the famous Barnum and Bailey Ringling Brothers Circus. Barnum's American Museum was a legitimate enterprise, and it was said by freak show historian Richard Bogdan that it was more than a success, it was a national force. David Scull notes that dwarves, pinheads, Siamese twins, albinos, giants of height and girth all became staples of American diversion. This, like slavery and factory work, I believe, conditioned people to objectify other people who they perceive as different. This route has led to the current situation where the lords and kings of corporate technology perceive us as little more than data on the road to the transhumanist techno-occult future. David Scull notes an ominous connotation to the concept of recreation, which implies a process of death and rebirth. This may explain the pseudo-death-defying thrills and rides of the carnival, where we can enjoy encountering our mortality, placing our bodies in contraptions which take us outside of the usual, where nothing is fixed, everything is possible. Similarly, pornography allows us to encounter sex, and horror films can allow us to encounter our own death and mortality. So it is that from the carnival, we get one of the great founding fathers of horror, Todd Browning. Russian playwright Maxim Gorky found cinema to be less entertainment than a technological nightmare without sound or color, a ghost life that debased the senses and conferred a kind of living death on the beholder. Todd Browning was to infuse that living death with enchantment and fascination. Todd Browning ran away to join the carnival at 16 years old, working in many capacities, including as a contortionist. His ongoing role was the hypnotic living corpse, an act he did on riverboats and local amusement parks along the river. In this bit, Browning would allow himself to be buried as an actor who had somehow died unexpectedly the previous day, and people could purchase tickets to the burial for 25 cents, which included a return ticket for his exhumation the following evening. The two-day burial was a freak show travesty of Easter weekend. Browning said he came to like the isolation and the ability to focus his thoughts that it gave him. He was from Kentucky and changed his name to Todd from Charles. He had no permanent address and loved easy money. He also enjoyed being a con artist, a liar, and a deceiver. Americans were hungry for spectacles and miracles, and Browning was glad to offer either for a price. His uncle was a professional baseball player for whom the bat called the Louisville Slugger was originally designed. So we see perhaps a spiritual thread running from carnival hucksterism through spectator sports and titillating films of freaks and the macabre. Like his athletic uncle, Browning's life was filled with showmanship and drinking. Early on, it was noted that he had a great singing voice and was in the choir of Louisville's historic Christ Church Cathedral. He put on backyard shows of all kinds for a few pennies a head. He felt a personal affinity for the gypsies who were attracted en masse to the Kentucky Derby every year. Scull notes that the gypsies were disdainful of outsiders in the same way as amusement park and carnival people. Outsiders were only to be tricked, bilked, exploited, and scorned. At 16, he became sexually infatuated with a sideshow queen and ran away from conventional life and responsibility to join the traveling show. His lack of love for other human beings, fear or faith in God, or any firm sense of social responsibility led him to the lowest dregs of carnival life, barking for a phony wild man of Borneo and consorting with alcoholic geeks who bit off the heads of rats and chickens to get their next drink. In the words of David Scull, he was instantly at home in the shadows of the freak pit. Later in his film career, Todd Browning would make the mistake of using real fake freaks in his 1932 film. Audiences of those times felt more at ease with horror as long as they could see the zipper running up the monster's neck, as Stephen King noted. Browning learned to be an escape artist. He spent a season as a clown with the Ringling Brothers Circus and was a jockey and a stable boy. Browning did vaudeville with buck and wing performances of fast solo tap dancing and a blackface minstrel routine. He traveled the world as part of a contortionist act. He claimed to be an acrobat and an illusionist. In 1913 in New York, Browning met his fellow Kentuckian, an extremely important creator of counter-Christ culture, D.W. Griffith, who offered him an acting job. Griffith took Browning to Hollywood, but Browning's tendency for recklessness and drunkenness caught up with him. He drunkenly crashed his car, and actor Elmer Booth was killed. His drinking caused him to be blacklisted from Hollywood from 1923 to 1924. Lon Chaney, along with Todd Browning, was to engage fascination of Americans in the world like never before. The two were united in Browning's comeback assignment with Irving Thalberg's film The Unholy Three in 1925. In this dark spiritual nexus, we see the convergence of numerous counter-Christ elements. The three protagonists are, as the title states, unholy. Three misfits on a crime spree whom we nonetheless root for to a degree. The sympathy for the devil enchantment and corruption of our own morality that would decades later be refined to perfection in the Godfather films. In the story of the three criminals are circus performers. The three criminals are circus performers, a ventriloquist, a midget, and a strongman. Chaney has the ventriloquist dress as an old woman, and the midget disguises himself as a baby. The movie was a huge blockbuster, being lauded by the New York Times and other critical outlets. The film also presented Browning's motif of the dark carnival, particularly the circus sideshow, the same milieu from which he emerged in real life. But it was Chaney, the by now world-famous man of 1,000 faces, who would become the central element in Browning's cinematic successes. Chaney's parents were deaf and mute, and the silent art of pantomime was ingrained deeply within him as a result. He was also willing to abuse his own body, sometimes horrifically, in order to play the part of someone disfigured or incapacitated. He experienced profuse bleeding on the Phantom of the Opera set from his own devised wire contraption to appear noseless in the famous unmasking scene. Against medical advice, he endured pain and cut off the circulation of blood in his legs to play a man whose limbs were wrongfully amputated in the movie The Penalty, which made him a star in 1920. Lon Chaney was the father of modern horror character acting. His ability to change his appearance was like a superpower that audiences lived vicariously through his performances. His appearance strangely assuaged mutilation anxiety, running high with so many World War I veterans returning home disfigured. Skal also holds that Chaney served as a link between popular culture and modernist developments in the arts and sciences. With no fixed reality or nature, he was the fragmented, relativistic everyman created by the war, existentialism, and modern physics. Chaney's plastic experiments on his own body foreshadowed the concurrent efforts of Cubist, Dada, and the emerging series of painters, the surrealistic painters, to stretch the human form into increasingly bizarre configuration. Lon Chaney set the tone for our image of the Hollywood star. He was the first actor in the film community to affect dark glasses in public and the first to deliberately cultivate an inaccessible persona. He used to say, "There is no Lon Chaney. I am the character I am creating. That is all." Having no identity, he validated many of his fans who suspected in this industrializing mass society that they might be nobody themselves and were losing what unique identity they had to this mass industrialization. Lon Chaney, like Chaney, women especially would be expected more and more to become wizards of makeup in order to withstand the looming sexual rigors of the 20th century. The grotesqueries of Lon Chaney's characterizations often made people aware of their own imperfections as monstrous and in need of some consumer product amelioration. In the back of the fan magazines featuring articles on Chaney and the Christ-like suffering he endured to present his characters were numerous ads for improving one's appearance, getting rid of what they called unsightly hollows, or peeling off your skin, or having a particularly perfect looking nose, or wearing the right Bantam red lipstick. In The Penalty, Chaney's character had his legs wrongfully amputated as a child and grows up to be a vengeful underworld Hollywood gangster. The sub-theme of The Penalty was the impotent rage of maimed World War I veterans. And this preoccupation with appearance would lead very much to the selfie-obsessed narcissism, somatic narcissism, that we have endemic in our culture today. From there, Chaney went on to play an ape-like hunchback and the mad scientist he assists in A Blind Bargain, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and the Phantom of the Opera. The face makeup in the latter two was grotesquely suggestive of the very wounds many returning World War I veterans reluctantly displayed in the form of smashed features, missing noses, and mouths full of broken teeth. Chaney underwent his usual masochistic endurance test in these roles. Both of those movies also juxtaposed physical deformity with obsessively detailed physical reconstruction of European landmarks, the Cathedral of Notre Dame, the Paris Opera, etc. In Phantom of the Opera, no reason at all was given for the main character's deformity in that initial film, although later films supplied things like he had acid thrown in his face, etc. Many assumed it to be a horrifying birth defect. Chaney's contortions reflected the self-molded individual and reality that was found in the art movements of Cubism, Dada, and Surrealism, all of which were immersed in strong occult influences, which we will explore in another video. It was all man creating and reshaping God's world, narcissistically obsessed with self-expression rather than expressing the infinite mind and will of God in some aspect. In The Unknown, Chaney plays a fake circus freak, pretending to be armless to avoid the police. He falls in love with a beautiful circus performer played by Joan Crawford, who has the unusual sexual phobia of being repulsed by the idea of being held in a man's arms. The Chaney character, Alonzo, blackmails the doctor into amputating his arms, only to discover that she has overcome her phobia and fallen in love with another. Chaney, in both his craft and his characters, did not exhibit much respect for the body as the temple of God. In typical Gnostic fashion, it was as if he himself were God. In fact, Joan Crawford, who was in awe of him, said it was as if God were working when she watched him. He had such profound concentration. He did not unstrap his arms between scenes and was able to convey emotions and emotional agony that was shocking. Chaney's characters also spoke to that part of people which fears they will never be loved, that we are somehow beyond God's love and forgiveness. It is exactly the kind of illusion the enemy would promote as the human condition. After World War I, Freud was extremely popular, and he saw repressed sexual anxieties behind most fantasy stories, and sometimes this work is interpreted that way. In He Who Gets Slapped, Lon Chaney takes his turn in playing the clown, a particularly tragic one, who was originally a scientist before being portrayed by his wife and a rich baron. Some of the artwork and imagery attending the film is unforgettable, but its theme juxtaposes the clown who makes us laugh with the experience of being laughed at and humiliated. Browning and Chaney first delved into vampirism in London After Midnight. Vampires, according to David Scull, presented a bottomless realm of sexual displacements and orality that would continue to fascinate Browning, leading to his greatest success, bringing Dracula to the screen. We will be going into Dracula and Frankenstein, hopefully, in upcoming videos, exploring them in terms of social engineering and spiritual warfare. Chaney and Browning excelled, perhaps even reveled, in depicting mutilated, misshapen, freakish people who feared being beyond love. Certainly, in Browning's case, this was not out of great compassion, but perhaps his cynical conviction that the rubes love a freak show. And it was not so much the beauty in human beings that these films conveyed, but more often the demonic and fallen angel perspective on the humanity they seek to destroy. Please remember to like and subscribe. This is Gumbo Craig, and this is Walking Out of Babylon. All glory to the Most High God. Shalom.